Hello, welcome back. Next two chapters, 21 and 22, we're going to do today. So chapter 21 is called Fear. Daniel had been walking with Sharp for over an hour. They were searching one of the wonders, an Egyptian pyramid filled with golden corridors, from top to bottom, because Sharp thought Silver's magical trace was stronger there. "You can carry that book around like it's a great weight," Sharp said, tapping the Book of Wonders with a cane through Daniel's jacket. "Well, it sort of is," said Daniel. "All that power." "Power is a good thing," said Sharp. "Aye, and dangerous too," said Daniel. "When I first came here, Mr. Silver trusted me to write in the book. I was actually quite good at it. But then one day I wrote something without him asking. I thought I knew what I was doing, when I really didn't have a clue, and I nearly did did serious damage. Now Mr. Silver wants me to wait until I'm ready for the responsibility." Sharp shook his head. "Making mistakes is how we learn," he said. "I bet you're more ready than you think." Sharp spun a left and stopped, sniffing at the air. He narrowed his eyes and touched a hieroglyph on the wall, causing part of the wall to open, revealing a secret room. In the centre of the room sat a stone sarcophagus. The drier air caught in Daniel's throat. "You don't think he's not in there, is he?" Sharp said nothing. He approached the tomb, which was shaped roughly like a man. He gripped the lid with his big hands and pushed. Stone grated upon stone as the lid began to move, until there was a large enough gap to look through. Daniel leaned over, praying Silver was not inside. A fluttering explosion sent him tumbling back, and a dark cloud of screeching bats erupted from the tomb. They were in his hair, on his face, crawling on his skin. Sharp grabbed Daniel and dragged him out of the main passage, slamming his hand on the hieroglyph. The doorway closed, locking the bats in their tomb. "Definitely not in there," said Sharp. They left the pyramid and began to walk through the Emporium passageway. The cracks in the walls were becoming more pronounced, and fissures appeared on some of the floors. "Tell me, Daniel Holmes," said Sharp after a while, "what are you scared of?" The question came from nowhere, and it caught Daniel off guard. He thought for a moment and then said, I don't know." Sharp grinned. The stairs were getting steeper. Daniel struggled to keep pace. "You're frightened of something. I can smell it in the air around you. There is no shame in it, Daniel, but I will tell you, whatever it is, whatever frightens you, it must be overcome. To be truly great at magic, you must be fearless. Lucien is a perfect example of a missed opportunity. I know him better than anyone. I've seen how his fears have bound him like chains, and I wonder what he might have achieved had he not spent his life running." "Running from what?" said Daniel. Sharp waved a hand in the air as though he was swatting away a fly. "That doesn't matter. What does matter is that he wasted his life wrapped in this cocoon of a sparkling brick, cut off from the world rather than changing it. If you let your fears take root, boy, they'll grow and multiply. Fear is weakness." "I don't think he's wasted his life." "You are too young to know the better," Sharp said, turning the tail of the sentence into a laugh. "Have you ever been scared?" said Daniel. And as that question left his lips, rain began to spit in the passageway. Sharp stared down at him as they walked, and the droplets of the rain began to bend around them, leaving them dry. He did not answer the question. They walked on in silence, and the subject of fear floated around Daniel's mind, bubbling to the surface again and again, until at last he felt he had to let it out. "When I was a little boy, too little to properly remember, my dad died at sea. He was a fisherman. His boat went down in the storm with him inside it. Nobody could help him. He must have watched the water rise until there was nothing for him to do but to breathe it in. Can you imagine what that must have been like?" Sharp did not look around. "That is not a pleasant way to die, if such things exist. I dream about it every night. I see him dying over and over, and I'm scared that it will happen to me." Sharp showed a spark of interest. "So you're scared of drowning?" "No, not drowning. It's just that, well, I can't imagine how frightening he must have been, knowing that the end was coming, knowing that he only had a few breaths left, and in the end, in the final seconds when he should have been with the people he loved, he had nobody. He died in the dark with nobody's hand to hold. I don't want to be alone." The world began to shake. A rumble from deep within the Emporium filled the air, and the corridors groaned. Daniel leaned on the wall until the movement had subsided, and all was still once more. save for the druddering and quaking of a nearby door and a distant rumble from beyond. Sharp stepped forward and threw open the door. Whatever wonder had lain before was now impossible to tell. All that remained was a room filled with wreckage and twisted metal and darkness and spreading silence. "What's happening?" asked Daniel. Sharp closed the door. He rubbed the stubble on his chin. "There is so much raw magic in this place, so much untamed imagination. It all requires an anchor, something or someone to keep it under control. Lucian is that anchor." At this, Sharp touched the wall and shook his head. But it seems he no longer has the strength. Mr. Silver isn't controlling it anymore. Either that, or he's lost the grip, or it's slipping away quickly," said Sharp. "The Emporium is beginning to rip at the seams. Some areas will be affected more than others, to begin with, like a disease in the organ of a body. This is obviously one of them. How long can it last without him?" There was a desperation in Daniel's voice. He hadn't been part of the Emporium for very long, but it felt like he'd been part of him forever. Like he'd been waiting for him, calling him his entire life. "I don't know," said Sharp. "Hard to tell with this much energy swirling around. Maybe days, maybe weeks, maybe months. However long, it won't be pleasant." "Days," said Daniel. Sharp gave a shrug. "As I said, I can't be sure." A pause. The corners of his mouth creased. "I wonder, is it possible?" "What?" said Daniel. "Is what possible?" Sharp waved a hand. "I was just thinking aloud," he said. "I was wondering, what would happen if we tried to use Lucian's book to find him?" Daniel's hand touched the cover through his jacket. "Mr. Silver told me not to," he said. "And after what happened last time—" "You're forgetting the circumstances, boy," said Sharp. He sounded different, hungry somehow. "I'm sure Lucian will understand. It's an emergency after all. And you aren't alone, are you? You have me to help. This might be our best chance to find Lucian. Your best chance to save your friends. All you have to do is create a door that leads straight to Lucian." Daniel brought out the book and stared at the battered cover, his fingers drumming on the leather. Was Sharp right? Was it different this time? Maybe he could just be justified in breaking Mr. Silver's rule in a desperate situation like this. At last he said, "You're right. It's the best chance we've got. I'll do it." So that's chapter, what did I say? It was chapter 21. And now we're going into chapter 22. It's a short paragraph, a short chapter as well. It's called Hands in the Darkness. I really hope that wasn't a mistake. Daniel stood too close to the new doorway. His nose almost touched the cold black surface. His heart banging in his chest. If Sharp's plan was a success, then Mr. Silver might be on the other side of the door. "Something wrong?" Sharp stood a few metres behind him, hands grasping his cane tight. He sounded impatient. "I'm just wondering what we're going to find," said Daniel, recalling the last time he broke the rules. "Even if it has worked, what if we walk through and find him hurt, or worse?" Sharp stepped forward and reached out an arm. For a moment, Daniel thought he was going to place it on a hand on his shoulder to tell him not to worry, that Silver would surely be fine. But the hand passed him by and instead gripped the handle of the door. The click of the latch sounded like a gunshot in the hush, and the door crept open. Daniel did not have time to scream. Hundreds of intricate, wrinkled hands crowded the doorway, reaching and grabbing at him, pulling him in forward by the neck and the hairs, pulling him by the neck and the hairs and ears by the clothes. He could see no faces, no bodies, as he fought them. There were only shrunken, withered fingers. They surrounded him now. He was almost through the doorway, enveloped, suffocating, fingers covering his mouth and his nose. Perhaps he would die here. He closed his eyes, kicking and scratching a bit. A bony hand grabbed his head, twisting him around and pulled him further into the tangled mass. Then Daniel heard a voice, filling his head to bursting. "Leave," it said in a whisper. That ran right through him. "Leave us." Slowly the hands released Daniel and he wriggled and squirmed free, feeling less crushing pressure, fewer cold grips. Another hand grabbed his own, this one warm, and he was heaved forwards. He landed on the cold Emporium floor on his hands and knees, gasping and clutching his throat. "The book! Do you still have the book?" Sharp stood over him as his eyes bulged. Daniel felt his pocket. His shaking fingers touched upon the book. He nodded. Sharp span away towards the open door, where hundreds of hands reached and clawed and grasped at the air. He grabbed the door, tried to pull it shut, but the hands refused, fought against him. Sharp did not give up. He opened his mouth and yelled, a guttural scream from the depths of his belly. He pulled so hard that the angry veins appeared on his neck and his forehead. Slowly the door began to close until the latch clicked and Sharp collapsed against the wood, holding it shut with all his weight and strength. "Get rid of it!" he yelled at Daniel. The words shook Daniel from his daze. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the book and found the right page. Tearing it from the book, he ran to the nearest flickering lamp and held the paper to the flame, where it turned glowing ash and scattered. The cracked black bricks around the door closed in, shrivelling and shifting into place, multiplying until the door was blocked and the door was gone. Sharp leaned against the wall, panting. "What did you do?" he said. "Only what you asked me to do," said Daniel. He stared at the book in his shaking hands and at the place on the wall where the door had been. He tried to figure out what had gone wrong. Last time he'd written in the book without permission, Mr. Silver had explained there was a reason things had gone out of control. In trying to bring back his parents from the dead, Daniel had crossed an impossible and dangerous line. This time he attempted no such thing, only a simple doorway leading to Mr. Silver. "Maybe he doesn't want us to find him," he said, and his eyes widened and the idea struck him properly. Sharp gave him a quizzical look. "What are you talking about?" I heard a voice in the room. "Leave us," it said. "I think that's what happened. That was just happened was a warning from Mr. Silver. A message. He was telling us not to come looking for him." Sharp straightened up and dusted off his suit. "I'm growing tired of these games," he said, and his voice was cold and sharp. Then he brushed past Daniel and walked away, his cane clicking on the floor. As Daniel watched Sharp go, something troubled him. He'd almost been eaten by a door, yet all Sharp seemed to be worried about was whether the Book of Wonders was safe. In fact, every time Sharp saw the book in his eyes would shine and a strange look would creep over his face. Daniel stowed the book back in his pocket, let his hands rest on it, and perhaps he was imagining things. Sharp had saved his life twice now, after all. The stress of the crumbling Emporium and of Mr. Silver's disappearance might be taking his toll. He hoped so. And at the same time, Ellie had been right. Sharp was Daniel's responsibility. From now on, he'd watch his every move. And there we go. That is chapter 22. We'll have a couple more, probably 2 more chapters tomorrow, before the weekend. I hope you're enjoying it, and until then, stay safe. See you later.